Hello and welcome to the CUFI Weekly. I'm your host, Kasim Hafiz. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the CUFI Weekly. I have a question. If I asked you if you knew about the murder of an Israeli just a few days ago, did you hear about it in the news? Did you hear about it in the media? I'm guessing unless you keep up to date with these things, unless you read the Israeli newspapers, the answer is probably going to be no. But on December 16th, a Israeli named Yehuda Dimintman, a 25-year-old father of a 9-month-old child who was a yeshiva student, was murdered by a terrorist. Now, this isn't an isolated event. We've seen an increase in terror attacks against Israelis, and this is not, sadly, the first fatality in the last month. Now, if we go back to November 21st, a Hamas leader opened fire near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City, murdering one person, injuring 4. This attack was premeditated. He'd already helped his family leave the country, and his family celebrated his attack and said how proud they were that he had opened fire, killing an innocent civilian. On December 8th, an Israeli woman who was walking her 5 children, including one child in a stroller, was stabbed in the back. Her injuries were light, and thankfully she had no long-term injuries and the children were safe. And on December 18th, a 38-year-old man was lightly hurt in a stabbing attack in Hebron. I'm assuming that most of these you may not have heard of. Like I said, if you keep up to date with Israeli news, you probably will have. But this is the daily reality for Israelis. I know we've mentioned it before. I know we've talked about the attacks and the terror that Israelis deal with on a regular basis, which isn't reported in our media. But it's so important that we keep talking about this. These are human lives which were taken. These were human lives which were ripped out of their families and their friends by hatred and evil. And sadly, the Western media continues to ignore this. We will see when a conflict erupts, when Israel takes action to defend its civilians, you'll see that in the news. You'll see Israel's defensive actions. You'll see Israel being painted as an aggressor. But on a day-to-day basis, there are terror groups surrounding Israel, in Israel, who are trying to murder Israelis. And there are so many attacks, so many attempts that now even when 1 or 2 people are murdered, the Western media on the whole seems to ignore it. Or even worse, there are instances of Western media headlines completely twisting the news. Like suspected attacker killed by Israeli police. Or there's even been instances in the past where it talks about the terrorist being killed, but doesn't even talk about what the terrorist was doing, trying to murder innocent Israeli civilians. So I know this is a time, it's almost Christmas, lights, candy canes, all these things that are happening. We can't forget what is happening in the Middle East. We can't forget what is happening with our friend and ally in Israel. We can't forget what is happening in the land that Jesus was born in. We're seeing in the land of Israel, Jews being murdered simply for being Jewish. We have a responsibility. We have a moral obligation to highlight what is going on, to speak the truth, and condemn terror and evil wherever it is. And right now, again, Israel is seeing this surge of terrorism. Literally, this morning, Hamas and Islamic Jihad announced a pact to increase terror attacks against Israel. So you have 2 terrorist organizations who have even had conflict between themselves are announcing that they're going to work together to increase terror attacks on Israelis. Have I seen this reported in any of Western media outlets? Have I seen anybody expressing absolute disgust and outrage at how horrific this is? That organizations are banding together to try and murder innocent Israeli men, women, and children? No. It's disgusting, it's abhorrent, but sadly that has become the norm. And that is why we must keep speaking out. We must be sharing this news. We must be talking about this because this is not okay. The murder of innocent Israelis cannot be something which is just brushed off as being, it's just the way it is in the Middle East. It can't be brushed off as oh, it's just another terror attack in Israel. No, it's disgusting and it has to stop. This lapsadaisical attitude that it's okay for Israelis to deal with terror attacks, it's okay for Israelis to be attacked, is absolutely disgusting and not okay. It's not the mark of a civilized society which looks the other way when innocent people are being targeted, attacked, and murdered, especially when it is our closest friend and ally. I know it's a very heavy topic, I know it's a very serious topic, but this is something which is imperative that we highlight and we discuss. Because right now, in Israel, there is a family, there is a 9-month-old child who will never see her dad. There is a 9-month-old child who will grow up without a father because of the hatred of terrorism. And that is a reality. This is Kasim Hafiz for the CUFI Weekly. For Zion's sake, do not remain silent. Thanks for checking out today's episode of CUFI Weekly. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest news from the Middle East along with topics involving US-Israel relations, please be sure to like and subscribe. And remember to click that notification button so that you are notified every time a new show is uploaded.